Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Saratoga History Podcast. My name is Bilal Aftab. I'm the mayor here in Saratoga and your host. We hope you enjoyed our first episode, which was on how Saratoga became a city. For our second episode, we're going to be talking about one of the gems of Saratoga, a city park called Hakone Gardens. You may or may not heard of Hakone Gardens. It's a special Japanese garden that sits a little bit behind the village. We're going to talk about all the things that make it special today, its history. But before we jump into that, just a friendly reminder, if you have any ideas, any questions, or any feedback for us, you can always reach out to us at podcast@saratogahistory.com. Today, we are so lucky to have two people who literally wrote the book on Hakone Gardens. We have Ann Waltonsmith and Connie Young Yu. Ann Waltonsmith is a really special person in Saratoga. She served as mayor here. She served on the board of the Saratoga Historical Foundation, which is the entity that oversees and produces this podcast, and is on the board of the Hakone Foundation, which is the foundation that oversees the day-to-day operations of Hakone Gardens. We also have Connie Young Yu, who's an independent historian who also, with Anne, wrote the book here, and also, as we'll find, has some pretty incredible perspectives and knowledge on Hakone Gardens. Anne and Connie, how's it going? How are you two today?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
We're very pleased to be here.
Well, thank you both for agreeing to this conversation. We are really excited to really take all the knowledge you have and share it with as much of Saratoga as we can, and also well beyond. But maybe we'll start from a really simple place. What makes Hakone Gardens special?
Hakone, being a Japanese garden, is unusual in the Bay Area as well as in the United States. It also is a very specific type of Japanese garden. It is not a garden that was built after World War II, and it was called a friendship gardens when many cities in the United States were becoming formal friends with cities in Japan. It was a garden that was owned by a set of three different groups of families, privately owned, and then was bought by the city of Saratoga in 1965. That's what makes it very unusual.
And how about you, Connie?
Well, I think has an incredible, splendid, gorgeous history, which is reflected in the garden itself. When you walk in the garden, you see the incredible Amand, which is the door that was built by one of the owners, Major Tilden, the second owner, and you see the upper house and the lower house and the pond. The design is a hill and pond design, traditional design for a Japanese garden. That was produced actually under the direction of Isabel Stein, the first owner. And I feel her spirit is there when we walk through because it has the authenticity, it has this aesthetics. It just, it continues to flourish.
What are some of the things that make a garden like Hakone authentic? And what are some of those elements that you mentioned?
Well, Isabel Stein was inspired, well, she loved Japanese culture and history, but she was inspired and initially to have her own private garden by visiting the Japanese pavilion in 1915 at the Pan-Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. 1915. Her husband was very involved. Oliver Stein, he was a realtor. He was very involved with the exposition and planning it. And they love the idea of having their own garden, and they bought a piece of property in Saratoga in 1915. Unfortunately, he died soon after that. She was able to go to Japan by herself with her son. We have the diary of the son going to Japan, where she would visit gardens. She probably visited the national park, which is Hakone Gardens in Japan. And then she came back with ideas and objects. And some of the objects came from actually the Pan-Pacific Expo to have in her own property. But she was able to have to have the services of an imperial gardener from Japan to design her garden. And it was a hill and pond garden. And today, the main attraction of Hakone is the beautiful pond, the koi pond, and the bridge. But the whole setting is so marvelous, and it is the same setting that she had planned 110 years ago.
That's incredible. When I think about gardens, right? There's Filoli Gardens, which is up the peninsula. There are other gardens in San Jose that folks visit, like the Rose Garden. What is it about a Japanese garden that is distinct from those?
For me, a Japanese garden has a very different philosophy in the landscaping. As you know, when we're going through our lives, we don't know what's going in the next year, 2 years from now. And a Japanese garden is built on that philosophy of hide and reveal. So when you walk into a Japanese garden and you walk into Hakone, you are walking around a corner. You're going through a beautiful gate that you gape at because of its immense size. And then you turn a corner and you go up a slight hill. And then you turn another corner and you're suddenly seeing a big building. And then you walk a little bit further and you then go through another bower of plants and you are revealed and you're seeing new sights, not as a English garden, which you're standing and seeing large plots of flowers in a variety of places, but you're seeing it piece by piece as you would in your life. And that's a very different philosophy.
It goes with the culture of Japan because, at Hakone, when Isabel Stein, when it was completed, she invited guests. She invited people to come appreciate it. And the same with Charles Tilden when he owned it privately. It was to be shared and also to share the culture of Japan because they invited Japanese poets, Japanese artists, an Japanese archer to demonstrate the art of archery. And we have photographs of this. And the premiere, the West Coast premiere of Madame Butterfly was held at Hakone Gardens.
What was Madame Butterfly? Asking as a
Opera.
young person.
The opera.
The opera.
Okay.
It was the opera,
Yeah.
but it was newly being released and it had been shown. It had been produced on the East Coast, and because she was a wealthy San Franciscan and she was on the opera. She was helping build the opera house in San Francisco, and she was bringing opera. She decided to bring this opera about a Japanese event, and she brought it to Hakone and had a partial showing down here.
She wanted the setting to be like at Japan, because that's the play, and but it was also the aesthetics, the setting of every building. Parts of the building were made in Japan and brought from Japan to Hakone. And there's a big stone near the lower house that you could step on before you go into the building. If you look at a picture of the premiere of Madame Butterfly at Hakone, you could see one of the actors stepping on that stone. And it shows the endurance of that, it's just like haiku, because it's the serenity and the elegance and the minimalist of the design of everything at Hakone, and it all comes together. In other words, when people walk through Hakone Gardens, it's different from other, like Filoli, which was built for the family to live and appreciate. This was built for the appreciation of the culture itself. And nobody picks the flowers or trims the trees or takes anything away from the garden. They are giving their spirit to the garden and sharing. You can feed the koi, but you're not supposed to disrupt anything. But that changes a person's appreciation of the garden. And children love it. I mean, when they walk through, they listen to the waterfall. They know it's a different garden because of the pathway, because it's not like a structured pathway. It sort of meanders and it goes with nature.
What?
I would like to add one thing that if you are hearing this broadcast and you know anything about Taoist or Buddhist philosophy, the Japanese gardens there are designs that come from those philosophies, and I can't go into it here, but it's that's what makes the garden very different.
You mentioned Isabel Stein living in San Francisco. What brought her to Saratoga and thought about making this here instead of somewhere else?
She was, as many of the wealthy families in San Francisco were finding out, is that it was a lot warmer down here in Saratoga than it was up in San Francisco. We didn't have the big foggy long periods of summer days. It was hot down here. And in addition, the railroad was just built that came down the peninsula from San Francisco down to what is now called the Bay Area. And so the wealthy families decided to come down and look for land down here as summer homes, to build summer homes. And could stay up in San Francisco and work during the week and then come down on the weekend in the summertime. And the kids and the moms were down here enjoying the summer and swimming and the warm weather. So it was because of the railroad, it was easy to get down here and it was beautiful weather down here. And so people like Senator Phelan, who was building his beautiful building just one hill over, the wealthy people were moving down here and building homes.
That's incredible how transit, right? Adding the railroad, right? And cars were not, they were just getting invented around this time and starting
Cars
to
were
proliferate.
just starting.
Yeah.
I know it's hard for people to think, what do you mean cars were just being designed and built? But the roads were just being built. The swamps of the Bay Area were being filled in. And so the roads, people could move around a lot more.
So we're talking about Isabel. You mentioned Isabel started this in 1915, which is when she bought. Is that when she bought the land, or what was that?
She bought the property, but she didn't start the gardens right away. It took a while, like 2 years.
Designing it.
But she chose that piece of property because there was so much land here, and also the idea of a hill. They had to cut down so many trees. It was just, there were so many.
Well, that was after, this Hakone Garden is on a hill that was completely logged by the time she bought it, because all of the Bay Area was being logged because that lumber needed to go up to San Francisco to rebuild San Francisco after the fire of the earthquake and fire of 1906.
One thing that we haven't gone into yet, but I'm curious to understand, deciding to build a Japanese garden 1915, what was the thinking behind building a Japanese garden in that time? You mentioned some of the aesthetics, but what was happening more broadly across America that might have made that controversial or maybe a step forward in another way?
The
controversy would be, there were alien land laws. There's so much racism against Asians. The Chinese exclusion law, and then which excluded so many Chinese. The Chinese exclusion law declared that hereafter no Chinese would be allowed naturalization to U.S. citizenship. This law, 1882 to 1943, stayed on the books, and during that time no Chinese was allowed to be naturalized. This law, the anti-Asian laws, were extended to Japanese when they came more in the 1890s. And then, 1913, Senator Phelan initiated a law, alien land law, and it was to keep Japanese from buying land.
Or becoming citizens.
Yeah. And so there was that prejudice, but there was always, and the same thing for Chinese, there's always the wealthy class of people. They loved Chinese artifacts. They loved Chinese culture. They loved Chinese porcelains and collections and paintings, all the art. And for the Chinese also, of the Japanese also, the love of the aesthetic. For instance, the Big Four, Crocker, Stanford, Huntington, and Hopkins, they all, in their mansions, they wanted Chinese things and Japanese things. So the Pan-Pacific Exposition was 9 years after the earthquake, and it was announcing to the world that San Francisco has, reborn, and it's a great metropolis, and it's the international city. And so they invited the world to come in, and they had these beautiful pavilions, and one of the most spectacular pavilions was the Japanese pavilion. And so I think that had a lot to do with, people's perception of the beauty of Japan and separating it from the racist laws. It was the love of the culture. Now, Isabel Stein had Japanese friends, and she was born in San Jose. And she was, as a child, she took piano lessons near Japantown, today's Japantown, and there was a Buddhist temple, Buddhist church there, and she would listen to the the bells and the chanting, and she would just go there, and she was just fascinated by it. So it wasn't just a passing fancy. It was a deep feeling or a deep affinity that she had for Japanese culture, particularly the music, because she was very interested. And then, of course, everything comes together.
I'd like to say this is one of the reasons why I've wanted to stay on the board and work so hard for Hakone was because of this. Connie and I have called it the soul of Hakone. It's the owners wanted to own this piece of property and have a beautiful garden because they also believed that they were fighting for something very important and to build understanding between cultures, that the multicultural place that we call Santa Clara Valley now didn't exist at that time. And there was a lot of anti-Asian feeling, and the owners of Hakone went through seemed to be saying by their ownership as well as their personal groups that they belonged to and what they were doing in their life to work towards building understanding about this multicultural valley and building an understanding about being building peace and understanding, I guess, is the best way of saying it, by understanding various cultures.
And Isabel Stein was a member of the Japan Society, which was just the opposite of what James Phelan wanted. And the society was for culture, not political, and to promote the culture. So it was a very sincere thing. And she dressed her children up in Japanese clothing. She had a wonderful collection. She took pictures of them. She wanted to, and they, of course, they were like little ambassadors for the culture. And the unfortunate thing was the depression. She'd lost, after her husband died, she really had to struggle, being a single mom with the 3 children and maintaining this garden.
And then the 1920s happened. And
in the 1920s, of course, the market crashed. And she had a very good friend named Charles Tilden, who was at that time, one of the richest men, even during the Depression, in the Bay Area. And he was the first, he founded the East Bay Regional Park System. He also was
Tilden Park, is that named after?
Yes.
Right.
So we did not delve into this history till during the centennial. We realized what an incredible person he was and how he saved the park system in the Bay Area. And here, we know of his ownership of this small private, compared to Tilden.
It's his summer home, too.
Yeah, it was his summer home.
So Hakone Gardens is a city park today.
Yeah.
But it was founded sort of by Isabel Stein as a private garden.
Yes.
And it was passed through a number of families.
Yes.
And so you mentioned sort of going from Isabel Stein to Major Tilden.
He owned it the longest, for 30 years.
And then his family finally sold it to a partnership of 6 couples.
Yeah.
And
as I understand, Connie, you have a bit of special understanding of this partnership. Could you tell us about that?
The last heirs of Tilden, they decided to sell Hakone Gardens. It was up for sale. There was actually a big ad we have the ad, real estate ad saying, oh, great opportunity, could be this garden. This is a Japanese garden, but it could be a resort, a private resort, or it could be a great idea for subdivision. The partnership, the Greshams, this is Joseph Gresham and his wife, Clara. They lived across the street, and their son also, Eldon, and his wife, Dion. They loved the garden, and they said, it's up for sale. We would love to buy it, but we can't do it by ourselves. We have these friends, these Chinese-American friends, 4 couples. That's John and Mary Young, my parents, and George and Marie Hall, my uncle and aunt, and then their partners, Johnny Can and his wife, Dan and June Lee. They were all involved with Ming's restaurant. And Joseph Gresham said, you've got to see this place. And so they all got together, and I think I remember going there at that time, and I thought, this is so magnificent. Is it possible? They said, if we all come together, we could buy it. And we would just use it and save it. It's not going to be subdivided. It's going to be a beautiful...
What year was this?
61. I was a student at that time, college student, and I remember coming after it was purchased. By the 6 couples. I don't think we were ever there at the same time. We just came at different times, very quiet. It was a wonderful retreat. And I knew our dads and moms were working hard to maintain the gardens. They had to restore the pond, to recover. Gardens are so fragile. If it was neglected in a month, Anyway, they remembered clearing the poison oak that had encroached on the property.
And they built a new road up.
And they built a road, an access road, because it was just a narrow dirt and pebble road. They built it. One side of it still exists today. And the amazing thing is, and I can't believe it, that my mother was a Chinese a brush painter. She had a club, and she had a master artist she brought to Hakone, and they painted a Hakone, and they never did put anything Chinese or anything that wasn't authentic in the lower or upper house. In other words, it was kept completely authentic Japanese, the way the Tildens had maintained it, and before that, Isabel Stein had designed it. So it was absolutely remarkable.
So that was in 1961.
61 to 63. They owned it for 5 years. And during that time, I remember we would come there for a picnic, and we would put everything and take it out. And also the partnership, the Ming's people, they hired one of the Charlie Ray, who worked for them, an African-American, to be the gardener caretaker. He lived by himself there for 5 years. And actually longer. I think he was the only African-American in Saratoga at that time. So we felt very, and this was before the Fair Housing Law, in which there was covenants. People of color couldn't buy property in certain places, certainly not in certain places of Saratoga. So it was just an amazing. So we just had a very good spirit about it. We felt very, democratic, and having this garden we felt that we were saving something.
And may I add that at this time, in the 1950s and the 1960s, the population in this Bay Area and in Saratoga was growing and exponentially. And all of the gardens, or all of the orchards, were being turned into housing. And so meanwhile, Saratoga was also going through this huge growth spurt, and it was, the Hakone Garden was in danger. If your family were going to sell it, they were in danger of selling it to someone who would turn it into a housing development. And so, you want to say what we did? Your family went?
I think that after 5 years, it was not practical for the 6 couples and their families to have this private retreat. It's beautiful. And it was very expensive to maintain it the way it should be maintained, even though it was lovely. I just remember it being so perfect. You couldn't even, my brother, when he was coming, you don't even see a wrapper, not even a cigarette butt it's just perfect. But it needed, there was a roof that had to be replaced, the pond had to be constantly maintained, everything. And they just said, it's really expensive, but we don't want to sell it to have it subdivided, because we know what's happening. So, led by Joseph Gresham and his son Eldon, who lived in Saratoga, they said, we're going to go up to the city council and see if they will buy it. And they had quite a time convincing the city council. Because it was, first of all, the city of Saratoga is
it was brand new.
Yeah.
It was 10 years old.
Yeah.
They had no place. They didn't have an official city council meeting place. They were busy designing the streets and where the businesses were going to go. So suddenly they were offered this beautiful garden that was sitting just outside the border of the city of Saratoga. So they were going to have 10 years in, brand new city, they were going to have to hire a lawyer and bring the property that was Hakone Gardens, include that into this new city, and find the money to buy it. That was really hard to do. And I'm very proud that our city council at that time, and our mayor, saw the value of this garden and wanted to work with
Mayor Glennon.
Mayor Glennon, you go ahead.
Yes, I just want you to mention that Mayor Glennon he persuaded the rest of the board to go for it, the council.
So it's like Hakone had this little soul that really wanted, it was a special garden and it really wanted to survive. And 50 years after going through 3 sets of private owners, it became a public garden.
And it's been a public garden ever since?
It's been a public garden ever since.
Before we jump ahead to talk about, sort of since then, let's sort of take a step back as well. There's some, unique history that I think is worth telling about Hakone Gardens during World War II. Connie, can you share some of that?
Yes, and during the centennial for Hakone, we wanted to delve into the history and celebrate Hakone's history, long history, and we just thought there's a lot that we have to research. We were very, very fortunate in being able to interview the daughters of James Sasaki, who was a gardener for 30 years, probably the longest person, the longest tenure of anybody at Hakone. James Sasaki, we were able to interview that history. We knew there was something about that period of World War II. And this came about, my delving into the history and interviewing them came about when Paul Sakamoto was the former superintendent of schools in Mountain View, Los Altos, the first Asian American superintendent of schools on the mainland. He wanted to say that. He's a very a wonderful educator and community organizer who's influenced and mentored so many people. But he also was a gardener and a horticulturist. He, when he retired, had a nursery called Sakamoto Plants. And when he decided to retire from that, he wanted to donate, well, actually during that time, he donated so many plants and the shrubbery and like over 40 blossoming cherry trees that we have today that we could enjoy for Hanami. But when he was being honored at one of our festivals, at one of the Japanese festivals, we just decided to honor him and, thank him. And then afterwards, he was chatting with me and he goes, "What happened to the gardener during World War II, the Japanese gardener?" And I said, "I have no idea." And I naively thought he probably wasn't in camp. Maybe he was excused. And so he asked that question, and he himself was incarcerated. He and his whole family. He said no Japanese American could escape the incarceration. Over 120,000 Japanese persons of Japanese descent, 3/4 of them American citizens, were incarcerated in 12 camps throughout the United States. So I decided I'm going to find out, because I heard that for the centennial celebration, we invited the daughters of James Sasaki, Jane and Betty Sasaki, to the dinner. And I said, I'd love to interview you and find out what happened during World War II and, your childhood here. And Betty was just very, very understanding and very eager to tell this history. And wow, interviewed her several times on phone and in person. Parts of her interview are in this film called Hakone, an Executive Order 9066, part of our story. She told about how during World War II, after Pearl Harbor, actually several months after, there was Executive Order 9066, and she remembered her father talking to the mother, saying, "Oh, Shizu, I will have to go," because the order had come through and they were given a very short notice to leave. And she just said, he said, "I will have to go, but not you and the children, because you're American born." I mean, it was that. And then suddenly they knew nobody. It's a race. So everybody of Japanese descent, man, woman, child, was sent to camp. And so what Betty told me was that her father said, "You have to leave. We have to drive there ourselves." And the mother said, "I don't want to be separated from my parents, my relatives in Berkeley." See, different areas had to go to different camps. San Jose, Santa Clara County, all of the Japanese went to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. And the Sasakis end up going to Topaz, Utah. Anyway, they had to drive to Berkeley, with what do they call it,
That's where the train station was.
The train station for the also the temporary housing. Anyway, before that, they could only bring what they could carry. And Betty said that she remembered that the mother was very sweet, saying each person could have one thing. And she was able to have a doll, an American doll, because she said, my father dug a pit in the orchard, which is now Hakone's parking lot, a big pit, and built a bonfire and told the children and his wife, you have to throw everything into the fire that's Japanese. The mother had to throw her kimonos, and when it came to Betty's turn, she didn't want to bring her Japanese books and her toys that were strictly Japanese. And the father said, Betty, you have to.
So these items of cultural importance, right, that you have in any culture, right? But of the ones of Japanese origin in this situation, he wanted to burn them for fear of identification.
Yes, and also they could only carry a few things to the camp. Houses were searched for any Japanese things. This is after Pearl Harbor. They said, the Japanese are spies. We're going to go through all their stuff, and anything Japanese was suspicious. For instance, a Japanese language school was completely destroyed. But individual families had to make choices, and they knew they're going to be identified as Japanese anyway, but they don't want to bring any trace of the homeland. So Betty remembered her brother David having to throw in his practice kendo swords, the wooden swords, into the fire. And I said, your mother, not the kimonos, and not your kimono. She goes, yes, 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 yes. So I had that story. It was just, and she told it to me again because I just said, I want to hear it again. Can I film you on this, tape you on my...
I think, sometime I studied this in kind of high school, U.S. history, the stories of the internment camps. And it's something that when I studied back then, thought, this happened at a national level, but never, how does that affect Saratoga? But it's remarkable to me that this terrible thing in our nation's history, there are tangible impacts to people in Saratoga, which has had Asian Americans for over a century, for very well before that period as well.
And can I say that there were good people who are also trying to protect the Japanese community and the Steins and the Major Tilden were their family were trying to protect these folks, and which they did. I mean, many people came back to no job and no house. Luckily, the Sasakis could come back to a job. And for those out there that are pet lovers, the Sasakis had a wonderful cat that they were so afraid.
So when they departed, Betty said, my father told Major Tilden, because he had to hire a Caucasian gardener. He goes, please tell him not to trim the trees. Don't touch the trees, and I will be back. And the thing is, Major Tilden kept in touch with him during this time. I mean, they were all considered enemy aliens. This was the amazing thing so they were at camp for 3.5 years. During this time, Major Tilden protected the gardens. During World War II, Japanese gardens were destroyed, vandalized, trashed throughout the United States, including Golden Gate Park. Hakone stayed the same. It was not touched. So what Betty describes, which really is amazing to me, she said, I don't know how this happened, but we took a train from camp and we end up, I guess, in Alameda or Oakland. She said she remembers there were black blinds on the windows so people couldn't see that they were Japanese coming back. And she said when we got off the train, there was a big car waiting for them, and it was Major Tilden's stepdaughter. He didn't have children. He had married a widow, and these were his daughters, and they were just wonderful, and they loved the gardens, and they loved the Sasakis. Anyway, one of the daughters had come with a big car and put them all in the car, 6 children, 6 people, drove them to Hakone Gardens. And Betty said, what I remember when we got, we landed there, we ran into the gardens. There was a cat, our cat named Kitty, that kept meow, 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 meow. It just kept circling us. It was our cat who remembered us after 3.5 years.
It's incredible that there's that history in Saratoga of literally on opposite sides of the same hill, you have Hakone Gardens, with this really deep and tormented history, right, for Saratoga. On the other side of the hill, you have Villa Montalvo, which Senator Phelan. And it's always struck me that we have a bit of that contrast, but you have a story of preservation and perseverance on the one hand. And look, to their credit, Villa Montalvo has done a lot of incredible work for the community ever since moving on from Senator Phelan. But it's remarkable to me that we have some of that history within Saratoga that you might hear about or read about in a history book at the national level, but we have a very acute sense of it here too.
And the wonderful story, the happy story is that the Sasaki's, the Shizu, the wife, also was a caretaker. She worked, in the gardens. She took care of the houses. And James Sasaki worked, he said it was like a child of his. He said he loved Hakone so much. And he was so dedicated. Hakone reached its height of its beauty right after he came back. And we have photographs of it. They were so proud of his work. And and what Betty said, people would come, this was in the 50s, and talk to him about the gardens and ask for advice on their bonsais and, their gardens. Suddenly Japanese was in again. His people really appreciated his work. And of course, Tilden had hired him from an ad in the newspaper, being just a great judge of character.
So since 1966, this has been a public park. What have been any big changes at Hakone in the decades since? What is Hakone like today? And how would it have been different from 1966?
Well, when the city bought it, and they quickly learned that a Japanese garden is hard to take care of and expensive. And so at that time, there were a number of people who wanted to start a sister city relationship with a city in Japan. So they did. And those folks, the city was thrilled to work with those sister city people to develop the garden and to continue, so that a parking lot had to be built where the orchard was. Another part of the garden, they started a bamboo garden, and that was the work of the sister city, bringing bamboo from Japan to start this bamboo section. And then in the late 1980s, there was an old house that had been the private family's kitchen and dining area, and that was torn down, and a new building called the CEC, or the Cultural Education Center, was built. So that was a part of the building was actually a tea merchant's home and business in Japan, and it was dedicated to Hakone. Numbered all the pieces, tore it down, and shipped it over here to Hakone.
And that's still standing today.
And that's still standing today. And it's
incredible exhibits there, like an origami last year, and all these incredible things.
It is. It's we call it the workhorse, because it is a big open space in which we can have art and cultural shows, and we can rent it out, and it's quite.
And Hakone is, generally speaking, pretty fully booked for events, for weddings. Right?
It is. We have it's nearly year round now. It's part of that's part of how we make our money and continue to develop it. So it has continued to become a beautiful, bigger space that is more amenable to large crowds than obviously when it was a private garden. It was built for smaller events.
And the reason why so many couples choose Hakone for their wedding is because of the spectacular scenery, the setting. I mean, standing on the bridge, the moon bridge, for a photograph is just so iconic, and it's very, but it keeps alive the culture too, because it's so appreciated. And the pond and
there's also some cinematic history too, right?
It is.
Well, and I understand the movie Memoirs of a Geisha.
Memoirs of a Geisha
won some Academy Awards. So.
Yes, it is the garden scenes are from that area.
It shows how authentic it is. It looked like Japan.
I do want to say that it is not a museum. Japanese gardens, another feature of a Japanese garden when they're privately owned, is that the owner usually uses their garden for events, for parties, for political meetings for. So this is a public garden now, and we try to have on the weekends, we try to have some event that's open to the public, some fencing club. We have book readings. We have shows about that are on something Japanese or Japanese
Kendo demonstration. Yes.
so that we're always trying to make it interesting. So when people come, it's not only a beautiful garden and taking pictures of different parts of the garden, but it also, we have some event going on.
This may go without saying, but we really encourage you to come visit Hakone Gardens.
Yes, yes.
It is behind our village. You can look it up on any Google Maps or anything. Google it, and you will find how to get here. And we hope after listening to this, you'll have a renewed sense of its beauty, of its importance, of its history. And so we really want to invite you to come there. We also encourage you to check out the museum down in downtown Saratoga as well. One thing we want to do before we wrap is I want to ask you a couple of questions. My first question is, what is your favorite restaurant, either currently or sometime in the past, in Saratoga?
Mint Leaf is mine.
Okay, that's a good one.
I love the bell tower.
Yeah, bell tower is great. And, again, keeping the focus on Saratoga, what's an example of a kind thing that someone has done for you in Saratoga?
A kind thing is, I live close by to downtown Saratoga. And when I walk down there for my daily walk, people are so friendly and just the smiles and hello. And that's, to me, is the beauty of a small town.
The courtesy on the streets, people watching out for one another, because there is traffic, and I really appreciate that, and the smiles. And I look in windows and I stand there and look, and sometimes somebody will come by and go, "Oh, isn't that cool?" or something. Cool piece of pottery there, and I just enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ann and Connie, for doing this episode. Thank you for all that you have done for the city of Saratoga, for Hakone, all the ways you're involved in the community. I mean, it shows to the community, right? All the things that you've done. So thank you so much. We also just want to thank everyone for listening. If you have any questions, feedback, or maybe your own anecdote or story about Hakone Gardens, don't be shy about reaching out. Podcast@saratogahistory.com is the best way to get a hold of us. You enjoyed our time here, and forgive us if we made any mistakes. But thank you again for listening.